And I'm Jana. I don't even know how to respond to that, really. It's a very atypical introduction. Hi, Ben.
How's it going?
All right. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next conversation with Dr. Jana Riess and Dr. Benjamin Knoll, we're going to talk about Mormons who are kind of out of the box. Mormonism is really good for nuclear families, but what about singles or gays or people who may have been widowed or widowers? Is it really ideal for them or for the divorced? We'll talk about what things the church can do that can help with people who are kind of out of the box. Check out our conversation. By the way, I'm also giving away a copy of The Next Mormons to one of my newsletter subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the free newsletter at gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and you can enter to win this copy of The Next Mormons. Now back to our conversation. So, that leads to the next question. Is there anything in your book that you think that leaders can use to keep people in?
Yes and no. So that's my wishy-washy answer. The yes part is yes. There are things, for example, backing away on LGBT issues can only help. It certainly would help if the church did a better job of incorporating more millennials into things that they care about rather than indexing genealogy or things that the church cares about but that are not necessarily driving attendance for people in their 20s. There are a lot of things like that. We could have better architecture. We could, I have a whole list of those things. But the no side, which I think is just as important, and I'm speaking here as a historian, when we look at the bigger picture of what's going on in American religion more generally, Mormons and ex-Mormons are so tunnel-focused on what the church is or is not doing that is driving this problem. They miss the bigger picture that Mormonism is not an island. And we have, throughout our history, been buffeted by the tides of whatever is going on in American religion. In the 1950s and 60s, when religion was thriving in the United States, we were also thriving. And in the 70s and 80s, when conservative religions in particular were thriving in the United States, we were thriving. And now we're in a period where everyone is suffering. We are also suffering. So in that context, particularly because we are less than 2% of the population, there's not a lot we can do.
That's interesting.
I think that's a really important point there in terms of thinking about, and that sounds like a cynical, pessimistic kind of answer, but from a perspective of social scientists who are trying to explain outcomes in American society, it seems like those wider forces are the bulk of the reason, or at least wouldn't know what to put a number on it, maybe like 3/4 of the reasons. Like the same reasons that most people are leaving the church are those similar to lots of other places. And so that would suggest there's not a whole lot the church could do one way or the other to address those wider societal forces that are going on, except then to move the needle. And I think that's a good thing. Like, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try or to try to change things, of course, to do what's possible. But I think of it a lot like the metaphor I think of is, as my perspective as a political scientist, thinking about like American election outcomes and presidential election outcomes. Most of the narrative focuses on things like, did this person have an awesome message? Are they connecting with voters? Did they win that debate? Did they have this good advertising campaign? Are they connecting with rural Midwesterners? And all these kinds of answers. When, statistically speaking, if we look back since World War II, most of the time, presidents who are running for re-election when the economy's doing good tend to win re-election. Like, those other things matter, but they move the needle a little bit, just not near as much as the narratives make them out to be. And so I see a similar thing thinking about religious affiliation and disaffiliation. We focus on the things we can control because those are the things we can control, but then that leads to an outsized expectation of the extent to which those things can fix everything, when there's the wider things going on that there's just less of a chance to have meaningful input in. So from a perspective of church leaders, that's what I'd be focusing on. What are the things that we can control, and what is here in this book that can help perhaps address some of those things?
I think that is so well said. and I would add that there is one area where I see church leaders really trying to change this outcome, and it's in the hammering of marriage and having children. Recent talks by certain church leaders have emphasized this, and that's not to say it hasn't been an emphasis all along, but the stakes are much higher. We're looking at a scenario where married church members, according to the church's own leaked statistics, married church members in their 20s are twice as likely to be active as single church members in their 20s of the same age. And so the church says, well, let's just get everybody married, right? And the people who are most active in the church are the people who have children of school age and are in those programs right now. Well, let's get people to have children, right? And of course that plays into the eternal message of the gospel that marriage and children are part of your exaltation forever. So it's not like this is just a cynical sociological move that we need to up our activity rates. They truly, I think, earnestly believe that this is also contributing to people's eternal salvation, but they have got to be worried about marriage among millennials as a whole in this nation. Millennials are delaying marriage. Millennials are having fewer children or not having children at all. And in terms of religiosity, that is a concern, not just for Mormons, but for all organized religions, because those young parents are the mainstay. They are the bread and butter of religious activity and tithing and programs, the success of the programs. And so that's where you're going to see them trying to change that narrative.
To be more friendly to singles, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm afraid not.
That's too bad.
To be telling singles just get married already, which seems to be the message that comes up again and again. Yeah.
I suppose from my perspective, one of the takeaways that I get from this research and these survey findings are, I come back to the thing we talked about earlier. What is it about the LDS culture that makes it so that if people aren't conforming 100% to the various cultural expectations, religious expectations, that they feel like they can't identify as a member of the church anymore, that I can't be in it if I'm not doing all of that? I wonder, we focus on this group because that's the group that there's a lot of stuff happening over here. The survey shows that most Mormons are happy in the church. Like, they're there, they want to be there, they're happy, and that's a really good thing. We're looking at this as the minority of those who are kind of in this liminal state of not sure, or they're having concerns or questions. We're focusing on them because that's where a lot of the focus has been lately. And I look at that and think, okay, so what are they thinking? Are they comfortable in a setting where the rhetoric and the teachings and the emphases are about this one standard of how you need to be? And if I'm not fitting that, can I be part of this group anymore? If there was a way to have the rhetoric be more inclusive to people who might not fit every box in there, and say, yes, you can also be here, and we love you and we're happy to have you here. And I do see some good moves on that end. We see general authorities oftentimes saying, there's a place for you here, there's a place for you here, no matter what, which is great. But then at the same time, there are also all these narratives about good Latter-day Saints do X, Y, and Z, and if you're not fitting X, Y, Z, especially at the local level, oftentimes it's taken and you run with it and emphasize only that, or emphasize only this part. And so that's something I think is within the control of church leadership in terms of thinking about, what are my priorities going to be? What am I going to emphasize? What do I care most about? The more, I want to say, black and white kind of rhetoric that we hear works really well for a lot of people, but they're the people who are already in. And it's good, and that's something that they need. Like, people need those types of messages because that helps them grow spiritually and helps them stay firm and loyal, and that's really good. And most of the leaders are in that group, and so are thinking to themselves, well, this works for me, why wouldn't it work for everyone else, right? And so I think this is what this book does well, is it presents information to leaders to say, these are the people you're having a hard time understanding. Listen to what they're saying, listen to their stories. Are there ways that you could think about your initiatives and your priorities to think, how are they going to hear this? And what could we do to help them feel more comfortable being here? And I think that's an actionable thing that is within the control of the church and leadership.
Great absolutely true. And I would just hold up a recent example of the church doing this well, which was just a few weeks ago, Mother's Day. Mother's Day is a pretty difficult time for a lot of women, even Orthodox women that I know and talk to sometimes struggle with this. And the Relief Society General Board came out with this short video that was shared on social media. Did you see this? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this was outstanding. And it was basically saying, of the women who are on the Relief Society General Board or serving as general officers in the church, and it might have included the Young Women Presidency, I'm not sure. Remember, yeah. I'd have to go back and see. But, out of this group of women who are essentially leading the women's organizations, the youth and the primary, I think, this particular number, they are not mothers. And this one has struggled with depression, or whatever. To keep it real, essentially. We need more messages like that even our leaders are capable of keeping it real, because that's absolutely not what you see in the slickness of General Conference. And particularly in talking to young adults who are much more accustomed to a world in which things are transparent, in which people are vulnerable about their lives and about their expectations of the world. That kind of slick, we've got it all figured out, doesn't actually resonate as well sometimes as just saying, wow, I struggled with that too.
And I'll contrast that just really quickly. So that message was there and that was good. I'm just thinking, anecdotally, of course, in my ward this last week on Mother's Day, it was the exact opposite message. It's the kind that, it's by someone I love and care for deeply, good friend, kind of a thing. But her message was, just the standard traditional, there's nothing more important in life than being a mother. My mother was amazing in every way. She was always there for me. She always had a snack for me. I knew that she loved me. She always was giving service in the church, and she could do no wrong. And so my job now is to do that for my kids. And there's the things that the world says that we shouldn't be mothers, et cetera, but we know that this is what righteous Latter-day Saints do, to be perfect moms in every way. I'm only slightly exaggerating, this was the kind of message. And I'm like, and that works for her, and that's good. That's a message that she needs and that many people need. But that kind of message then for the people who aren't fitting that mold or who didn't have perfect mothers, imagine, right? Or that perhaps their mothers were absent, or perhaps themselves are mothers and thinking to themselves, oh, this is the standard by which God is judging me. Well, then I don't feel like there's a place for me here. Well, and it just gets hard after a while.
It seems like with some people, you just can't make them happy no matter what. I saw a message on Facebook, and a woman complained that all the speakers on Mother's Day were men. And in my ward, it was funny because we had a man speak and then we had a woman speak. And the woman got up and complained that she had to speak on Mother's Day.
I don't go to church on Mother's Day. I've written about this. I avoid it every year. I go to my husband's church. He's Episcopalian. And in the last few years, one of the things that I've appreciated most is that not only do they not make a big deal out of Mother's Day, they don't talk about it at all. And it's just like any other Sunday in which here are the lectionary readings and we're going to focus on those. And it happened this year that one of the lectionary readings was about the passage in Revelation with the 7 seals and the scroll unfurling and everything. And it was a fascinating sermon. And it actually really helped me with something that I was dealing with in my life, to think about this bigger picture theologically of the eschaton and all of this. And I thought, I'm so glad I didn't go to my church today, Yeah.
Wow.
Why can't we just focus on the gospel?
And scriptures. And
period.
Jesus and our relationship
yes,
with God.
Jesus. Heard of that guy? Yeah. Anyway.
So is there a way, for the church to have these diverse voices? Because it does seem like we teach the nuclear family, the man and the woman. In my family, I've had a brother and a sister die, both with 4 children each, both around age 35, 36.
Really?
And so it's I remember. When my sister died, oh my gosh, that was so horrible, and it was Father's Day, and I know that for some people, we talk about singles, how Mother's Day and Father's Day can be very difficult for them, but we also have people, a brother died in a car accident, a sister died of a brain tumor, for which these can be very difficult conversations. And how does the church especially in the land of correlation, present diverse messages to all of these, to the singles, to the widows, and people like that. I mean, isn't that just an inherently difficult project?
It is, and you'll never be able to please everyone. That is absolutely true. You can't expect it. But you can try to be sensitive to the fact that people have very diverse life experiences, and you never know what they're struggling with when they're sitting in the pews. If I could change one thing about our youth program, it would be to have youth leaders everywhere not assume that everyone sitting in their lessons is heterosexual. You know, you can't assume that statistically, certainly. If you have 20 kids in there, one of them is in the church going to not be heterosexual. If you have 20 kids in there, 2 or 3 of them are not going to be heterosexual if they've left the church. You know, of course, they wouldn't be sitting there in the lesson. I do understand the problem with my analogy. But I can't tell you how many times I've heard from young adults who talk about the shame that they felt sitting in a church meeting or a church lesson where sexuality was referenced, and they felt like God was condemning them and that they should be ashamed of who they thought they were and knew they were from an early age. And that's a big burden to be putting on young shoulders.
Perhaps another way, and this is just anecdotal, this is...
I heard a great word today, actually, when I was driving down here on a podcast. It was anecdotal. Isn't that
nice.
Awesome? So you've got the anecdotal observations,
right, yes.
and then you've maybe got a little bit of data that you heard somewhere, and you throw them together, and you've got anecdotal evidence.
Exactly. Well, based on all the people that I've talked to,
right.
my very diverse social networks, which are extremely representative of the nation at large. Right, exactly. That kind of a thing, perhaps. And of course, there are doctrinal, theological emphases and imperatives, of course, that the church has a duty and obligation to teach, and it's important. But then the emphasis and the time that the different messages are given, to me, I would think the reality of God, the atoning sacrifice of the Savior, our relationship with God, feeling the Spirit and using the Spirit to guide us in our lives, the importance of prayer, those are things that I think would have wide applicability across these life experiences and across the different groups. And I'm not to say we don't hear those in church, because we do, we absolutely do. Anecdotally, just thinking for myself, over the last couple of years, though, if I were to tally these up, they're not the majority of the topics compared to very specific LDS things, which I think is good and appropriate, of course, like modern-day prophets and tithing in the Book of Mormon and et cetera, which is good and appropriate. But what's the weight of that, right? How often are we speaking about how do we cultivate our relationship with God and give people space to do the same, given that we have different spiritual gifts and different people interact with God differently, versus the importance of developing a testimony in tithing or fasting or something like that, which is good and important. But perhaps if that was the majority of the messaging, people would feel like there was, at least the people that we're thinking about for this book here, which are not the majority, but they're the ones that we're often concerned about, that might be something that could address this, or at least move the needle to some extent.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Riess and Dr. Knoll. You know, they didn't interview just Mormons. In our next conversation, we'll talk about ex-Mormons. Why did they leave? Jana and Ben give us more insights into that.
And we've got some information in a survey about what are the lives of former Mormons like. The ones who leave for these historical doctrinal issues tend to have a former Mormon life that's a little bit different than those who just leave because they just went inactive when they were teenagers, got married to someone who's not a member, that never really went anymore because their family's diverse. So it's important that we just say, just like within the Mormon community, there are different groups of people and diversity in how it's expressed. Same thing with former members as well.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.